You used to think the United States was the center of the global supply chain, that every flow of goods, energy, and data had to pass through this country. Think again while politicians in Washington are still arguing over tariffs. And the America First slogan. Canada is quietly reshaping the map of global trade. Each trade corridor worth hundreds of billions of dollars is shifting direction, no longer passing through Chicago, Texas, or California, but moving instead to Ontario, Halifax, and Vancouver. And if you're wondering why the price of your car, your electricity, or even your loaf of bread is skyrocketing, then the video. Canada quietly replaces US in $700 billion supply corridors. Is your answer today? Let's uncover the 5 trade corridors that are gradually causing the United States to be replaced. And remember, this information is compiled from statistical data and is not intended to defame any organization or individual. Number 1, the battery corridor. You may not notice it, but lithium-ion batteries are everywhere in your life. They're in the iPhone you scroll through every morning, the Tesla you drive to work, the drill in your garage, and even the smartwatch your nephew got last Christmas. Batteries are the lifeblood of the 21st century. And if that's true, then America used to be the heart. 10 years ago, no one doubted it. The US held more than 27% of the global EV battery production market, home to the headquarters of Tesla, Apple, and Ford. Icons of global technology. Detroit, Ohio, and Indiana were industrial junctions where millions of cathode units and hundreds of thousands of battery packs were assembled, packaged, and shipped around the world each month. The 2022 Inflation Reduction Act pledged tens of billions of dollars to localize the battery supply chain, aiming to sever dependence on China. Back then, everyone believed batteries would be America's springboard into the green era. But then something no one expected happened. Not China, not war, but Canada. In March 2025. The province of Ontario quietly passed a law called Bill 142 on strategic minerals. It sounds boring, but its impact was like slicing directly into the economic artery of the United States under this law. 11 critical minerals, including nickel, cobalt, lithium, and cathode compounds, could only be exported with individual shipment approvals from the federal government. No ban, no declaration of a trade war, but what followed was like pulling an IV tube, quiet and precise. Within 2 weeks of the law taking effect, numerous US companies received notices from their suppliers. Contracts would not be renewed, quota not yet approved, exports pending. Licensing some letters didn't even cite reasons, simply stating market conditions have changed. According to an industrial association in Michigan, over 63% of cathode orders from Canada to the MOS in April were indefinitely postponed. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, things were bustling. Canada signed a $20 billion trade deal with the European Commission, granting exclusive access to battery minerals for companies like Volkswagen, Stellantis, and Renault. For 5 years, these companies didn't just receive materials, they were also granted carbon credit benefits, import tax reductions, and logistics support in Bacon. The GM Pasco joint plant, originally serving the US market, quietly shifted its production line to European technical standards. Toronto became a hub for signing long-term contracts. Halifax, once a quiet port on the Atlantic coast, was zoned as a key export terminal for cold chain battery shipments to Hamburg and Rotterdam, America. Once the center of the supply chain found itself on the outside in Michigan, many small firms supplying battery components began scaling down. In Ohio, over 1,400 workers in Toledo. Akron and Youngstown faced reduced hours or temporary layoffs. In Indiana and Illinois, secondary plants assembling battery cells reported a Q2 sales drop of over 20%. Some high-tech companies in Pennsylvania specializing in electrode analysis. For Apple, were forced to redirect orders to Asia due to a shortage of materials from Canada. According to the Peterson Institute, the disruption in the battery chain alone could cost the US more than $38 billion in direct manufacturing value in 2025. not including the ripple effects on EV production, household electronics, and even defense, the price of nickel sulfate. A key cathode material jumped over $700 or $40 per ton after the US was forced to shift imports to Indonesia. A Ford F-150 Lightning now costs nearly $3 and $200 more. Meanwhile, a similar model made in Europe using Canadian materials remains at the same price. American consumers are beginning to feel the pressure. A June 2025 report from the Consumer Advisory Group noted that prices of electronic devices like phones, laptops, and high-end refrigerators rose by 5 torch capab, 11%, largely due to battery cost increases. Some retailers in California and Texas had to cancel orders, with domestic suppliers turning to European battery sources instead, even with longer delivery times, while Americans scramble to adapt. Canada is busy counting contracts. Deutsche Bank confirmed it successfully brokered a $4.6 billion guarantee package from EU firms. Canada's Ministry of Trade estimates export revenues from batteries and related minerals rose over 19% in Q2, a record surge in the past 20 years. A G7-related insider revealed Canada could directly control over $120 billion out of the $700 billion in value from the globally restructuring trade corridors, thanks to batteries and renewable energy. And so each battery container, each cathode unit, each block of lithium is gradually rerouting, no longer stopping in Detroit, not visiting Ohio or Illinois, but heading straight from Halifax to Hamburg, from Quebec to Paris, places once considered America's strategic rear. Bases are now just technical layovers on the Canada-EU trade map. The question isn't just how much the US has lost, but who is now redefining the future? When you no longer control the technological bloodstream of the century, what meaning is left in having a heart but no arteries? And the more worrying part, batteries may just be the tip of the iceberg. Beyond this electrification corridor, other routes are shifting. If the United States doesn't rapidly reposition itself in the 21st century supply chain, there may come a day when no one calls Washington the central crossroads anymore. Number 2, the power corridor. If you think control over the battery supply chain was the biggest prize Canada won from the 2025 trade restructuring, then perhaps you haven't looked up at the power grid, because electricity, a resource seemingly invisible, is becoming a new form of power, and Canada is quietly but surely seizing it in just 3 months. Canada has gradually replaced the United States in cross-border electricity supply contracts, not only within North America, but also with countries that once closely aligned with Washington in post-crisis energy strategies. What was once the exclusive strength of the US grid stability scale and geographic advantage is now being replaced by a new route from the north, where Canada is silently channeling electricity from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic and onward to Europe, according to a document released by the European Energy Agency in early June. Countries like Ireland, Netherlands and Belgium, once importers of high-tech electricity from the US, or partners and infrastructure projects with the Department of Energy, have now shifted their entire strategy to cooperate with Hydro-Quebec and Newfoundland Power. The EU cited reasons such as Canada's more stable clean energy supply, long-term commitments, and freedom from tariff volatility like that seen in the US. A preliminary report from Canada's Ministry of Trade at the G7 Hamburg summit stated that in the electricity sector alone, the country now controls roughly $76 billion of the $700 billion in global trade corridors being restructured. Conversely, estimates from the Peterson Institute Analysis Group suggest the US could lose over $42 billion in cross-border electricity contract value from 2025 to 2028 if this trend continues. But the most notable issue isn't in the numbers. Every major shift begins with a small change, and this time it happened right in the homes of millions of Americans. In mid-June, a heat wave swept through the northeastern U.S. in cities like Rochester, Buffalo, Detroit, and Duluth residents turned on air conditioners, fans, washing machines, just like every summer. But this time, something was different. Many noticed unusually high electricity bills. Some providers began sending notices of surcharge adjustments due to import supply fluctuations. And if you followed the power flow, you'd see it no longer moved in the familiar direction. Since the previous decade, the states of Michigan, Minnesota, and New York have depended on Canada for 20–30% of their summer electricity needs, mainly from Ontario and Quebec hydroelectric plants like Niagara Falls, DSU, and Matagami provided stable electricity at low prices, sometimes even cheaper than Canada's own domestic retail rates. It was a kind of electric diplomacy, stabilizing the region and strengthening neighborly ties. But everything began to change in late May, according to a report by the Northeast Energy Association, NEA, after the U.S. passed new tariff adjustments on certain imported Canadian steel and aluminum. Provinces in the north began imposing new surcharges on electricity exports. Analysis from J.P. Morgan noted price increases ranging from 20–25% per MW, forcing U.S. utility companies to make up the shortfall from the spot market at significantly higher costs. The impact quickly reached individual households. An internal estimate from NEWSFLASH showed retail electricity prices in areas dependent on Canadian power rose by an average of 11–14% in just 3 weeks in harsh climates. That meant an extra $8,100 on June's electric bill, while the U.S. struggled to cope with summer's energy thirst. Canada was forging a completely different path, with coordination between the federal government and the provinces of Quebec. Newfoundland and Labrador, a transatlantic ultra-high voltage power line was gradually taking shape. This route stretches from Churchill Falls through Stephenville, then runs underwater to Ireland, integrating into the European grid. According to the June 2025 EU Energy Outlook, some sections have already been successfully tested, with full operation expected in early 2028. Hydro-Quebec, Canada's largest public energy company, has also signed long-term electricity contracts with partners in Ireland and the Netherlands, according to the Financial Post. These contracts are priced at twice the average rate. Canada sold electricity to the U.S. over the past decade, with every megawatt-hour flowing eastward instead of southward. Canadians not only gain new revenue, but also feel they are no longer a supporting line in the American system. In Quebec, numerous community investment campaigns have been launched to allow citizens to own shares in export electricity projects. According to a June Ipsos Canada survey, nearly 62% of citizens support prioritizing electricity exports to the EU if the selling price is higher. Conversely, in Minnesota, Michigan and New York, residents are grappling with unfamiliar choices, cutting back on air conditioning, delaying laundry, or paying summer surcharges. For many seniors living on fixed pensions, even $20 more per month is enough to disrupt the budget. And the hardest thing to accept, this didn't happen because of war or disaster, but because the power no longer flows in their favor with a unified energy system from federal to provincial levels. Canada is proving that a nation small in population can still lead if it possesses the right resources, long-term vision, and consistent policy. When the entire system moves in one direction, electricity carries more than just kilowatts. It carries opportunity, position, and a role once held by the United States. Number 3, the agricultural corridor. If the battery and power corridors are emerging pillars in the post-fossil fuel economy, then agriculture is the foundational layer that has sustained global trade for over a century. But would you believe that even in this long-standing and seemingly stable sector, the position of the United States is now being replaced by its northern neighbor? The world once followed America's harvest calendar from Iowa, soybeans to Nebraska, sweet corn from Kansas, beef to Dakota's wheat. U.S. agricultural products used to be the global standard. Japan paid a premium to import American beef for yakiniku chains. And even Europe, with its stringent safety standards, still trusted USDA-inspected meat. But starting in early 2025, the global table began to change flavor. In just 6 months, numerous countries that once imported U.S. agricultural goods shifted to Canada, according to the International Grain and Agriculture Trade Association. IAT Japan, for the first time in 30 years, gave priority to Canadian wheat. In its national tender, South Korea signed a 5-year frozen beef contract with Calgary. The European Union, according to the June 2025 EU Agrade report, increased its soybean imports from Canada to 40% of its North American intake, the highest ever recorded. The reason isn't product quality, but trust in the supply chain. Many importing countries feared that new U.S. domestic trade policies may lead to supply interruptions or sudden tariff changes. Some European trade experts argue that America's push to localize its agricultural value chains could result in unstable export quotas. Meanwhile, Canada is doing the opposite, signing a series of bilateral FTAs reducing agricultural tariffs to near zero for over 20 countries, while massively upgrading its logistics infrastructure from large-scale grain ships to cold container networks at the ports of Vancouver and Halifax. As Canada expands its exports, American fields are falling silent. Since Q2 2025, several states have reported a severe shortage of agricultural labor, according to the U.S. Department of Labor. Large-scale immigration inspections in April-May caused tens of thousands of seasonal workers who make up over 70% of the agri-labor force in the Midwest to leave the market. In Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri, over 400 farms reported harvest labor shortages. In California, fields were set on fire, not for soil prep, but because no one was there to harvest. Images that spread as a silent warning from farmers. According to the USDA, in Q2 alone, over 1 million tons of corn in Nebraska went unstored in Iowa. Soybean prices fell nearly 20% due to local overup in Illinois. Hundreds of farmers lost long-standing export contracts signed over a decade. The number of people leaving farming surged, especially in counties in Kansas and South Dakota that rely entirely on export markets. In Missouri, local authorities had to hold emergency meetings with agricultural banks to halt loan foreclosures. Meanwhile, north of the border, the story is different. Canada's Ministry of Agriculture reported that agricultural exports in the first half of 2025 reached $89.2 billion. The highest ever. The provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan added over 39,000 new jobs related to agri-production and logistics. The Ottawa government even launched preferential loan packages to help small and medium enterprises build clean agricultural supply chains for export. And most importantly, every contract was delivered on time. It's not just about numbers. This change is showing up right on packaging. Several major food brands once associated with U.S. agriculture, like Texas beef, GMO soy from the Midwest, or grains destined for Asia, have been replaced with labels like Canada grown or product of Saskatchewan. Will consumers in Seoul, Tokyo, or Rotterdam notice the difference? Maybe not, but one thing is certain. The world is gradually eating Canadian food instead of American, and no announcement is needed to realize the shift. The U.S. may still be an agricultural powerhouse, but that title no longer equates to leading the global supply chain in the eyes of trade partners. The U.S. is becoming an unpredictable supplier, not just by administration, but even by Tweet Canada. Though not dominant in scale, is scoring points through stability, transparency, and consistency. And American farmers, they don't need to understand geopolitics, they just know that the crops are ready, the harvesters are waiting, but the contracts are gone. They once believed that planting guaranteed a buyer. Now they just hope to sell before the bank freezes their account. A new agricultural corridor has taken shape, not from Illinois to the port of Seattle, but from Saskatchewan to Vancouver, Halifax, and then to Rotterdam, Yokohama, Shanghai. This corridor carries no American flag, but it carries contracts, cash flow, and something the US once had, but is now losing trust. And that is the deepest loss in a global trade system where the roles are shifting. Number 4, the technology corridor. In a world where natural resources are gradually depleting and production lines are increasingly automated, power no longer lies in oil, steel, or grain. It lies in data. And whoever controls technology, especially artificial intelligence, shapes the future for decades. The world became accustomed to every tech road leading back to Silicon Valley, from the first servers to large language models, from social media to autonomous driving technology. Nearly everything originated in California, where technology is a religion, a symbol, and an irreplaceable destination. But then the digital map began to shift. If you follow tech investment flows during 2024-2025, you'll notice a small but steady current moving northward to Toronto. Vancouver-Montreal, names once mentioned for their scenery and quality of life, are now appearing in strategic reports by investment funds from Europe, Asia, and even the United States. According to a June 2025 report by Global AI Capital Venture, capital investment into AI companies headquartered in Canada rose by 31% year over year, while in the US, the increase was less than 6%. Not because Canada is cheaper, but because Canada is easier to breathe in. Many young founders, particularly from Europe and India, share that they choose Canada to start their ventures because of its clear visa policies, no abrupt changes and no interruptions due to clashes between branches of government. For them, a stable tech environment isn't the one with the most money, but the one that doesn't come to a halt because of a congressional hearing. The Canadian government doesn't speak loudly about ambitions to dominate technology, but within just 6 months, it quietly rolled out a foundational series of policies, from the National Public AI Strategy 2025-2027 to the KD $300 million AI Compute Access Fund, designed to provide high-performance computing infrastructure to small and medium-sized enterprises. The total budget dedicated to AI sovereignty is estimated at KDT $2 billion, according to an April 2025 announcement from Canada's Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development. And these moves are gaining traction. In May 2025. Alphabet announced the expansion of its AI center in Toronto, with the goal of developing deep learning models using decentralized data and complying with European privacy standards. Meanwhile, in Vancouver, companies like Cohere Sanctuary AI and 1QBit are attracting hundreds of engineers who once worked in Seattle, San Francisco, or Austin, according to the Tech Worker Mobility Index in Q2 2025. The number of high-skilled tech professionals applying to transfer their work residency from the US to Canada rose by 23%, the highest rate since 2020. This shift is not just about capital and talent. It is yielding tangible benefits for citizens as of June 2025. The high-tech sector has created over 52,000 new jobs in Canada, with AI alone accounting for more than 19,000 positions, according to the Canadian Tech Employment Index average. Salaries in tech hubs like Waterloo, Ottawa and Toronto rose 6.4% year over year. Meanwhile, some traditional US tech states such as Oregon, Massachusetts and Colorado saw a slight decline in hiring, due to companies relocating R&D operations to more stable markets beyond North America's borders. Canada is quietly building a new transatlantic data corridor. In June 2025, the EU announced plans to pilot a high-security data line connecting Brest, France to Nova Scotia via parallel infrastructure, separate from traditional flows through the US. This isn't a severance, but a multipolar approach to tech infrastructure, with Canada chosen for being stable, friendly, and not caught in the middle of trade wars. At the June EU-Canada summit, the two sides signed a memorandum of understanding on safe technology cooperation, including ethical AI, decentralized data, and green computing infrastructure. European officials consider this a major step toward reducing dependency on tech platforms based in the US, especially after a series of major data breaches in 2023-2024. Toronto, once known as a financial hub, is now transforming into the AI capital of the North. Former bank buildings now house startup headquarters. Cafes and streets around Front Street, Spadina, and King West are now filled with the voices and laughter of data engineers and young mathematicians from Berlin, Mumbai, London, Singapore. They choose this place not for the bright lights, but for the feeling of building technology without worrying about visas, surveillance, or investment barriers. At the same time, Montreal is becoming a new destination for quantum computing and medical AI supported by academic funds from Europe and South Korea. The quantum physics facility at University of Montreal, once only known in academic circles, is now welcoming dozens of international research teams every month. Meanwhile, in the South, the US still boasts top universities, leading firms, and already strong infrastructure. But for global tech investors, being strong is no longer enough. They need stability, and Canada, with its quiet determination, is delivering that. According to estimates from Tech Canada Insights AI, and data alone account for around USD 61 billion of the USD 700 billion corridor, currently shifting away from the US-centered model. If no major changes occur, Canada could control more than 40% of that total by the end of 2026, and that's not even Canada's final plan. We are moving toward the ultimate ambition, the final and most important corridor that the US has allowed its neighbor to seize. Number 5, the container corridor. No one remembers the names of containers. They don't glow like AI screens, don't generate electricity or agricultural.